Hello and welcome to A Mind of Her Own. I'm so excited to introduce my guest today, who's Dr. Hope Seidel. She's a mother of two young adults, a board-certified pediatrician, and a certified parenting coach in her private coaching practice, Parent with Hope. I thought she'd be a terrific choice for my series, Guilt-Free Real Women, Real Stories, to discuss some of the parental guilt most of us, myself very much included, encounter every single day. So, Hope, thank you so much for joining me on A Mind of Her Own.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
So you've got such a unique lens into parenting, into dynamics with children, working for many years as a pediatrician and then switching over into being a parental coach. Like, how have those two roles you played sort of fed each other?
Well, I've always sort of thought of my role as a pediatrician to sort of help guide parents. I think more so than some pediatricians. Like, oftentimes I'll ask my friends when they are connecting with their doctors, and this is not a criticism at all, that really don't ask a lot of the questions that I have always felt are so vital to understanding a family structure and dynamic and the way a children's wellness is. I've always thought wellness starts at home. Kids are generally well, like they want to be well, their bodies are typically well.
Yeah.
They get sick, but most of the time, so much of even their illness is perceived by their parent and their family structure in a way that can be unhealthy. And so the traditional medical practice really doesn't allow us to have the kind of time that you get with a psychologist or with someone who really wants to dig into the parts of you that are most meaningful. And I felt really burdened by that kind of space and really wanted to lean into children's wellness in a different way. And so, my work with families over the last 20 years has definitely informed my understanding of family dynamics and how important that is. But now I just have such deeper perspective into what challenges a parent to do something or not do something, what makes things hard for them, and the judgment and guilt that they place on themselves in terms of their own excellence and the expectations they place on their children in order to relieve some of those things. So, my work as a pediatrician has informed this work, and now I feel like I'm just doing the very best part of my job. So, it's awesome.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think even just going into a private practice for me and having more time, even as a psychiatrist, to do psychotherapy, to ask those questions and really learn those stories. Because you're right, you just don't have that in a clinical setting. I think increasingly so, people,
Yeah.
physicians, and nurse practitioners are struggling with that. So you brought up expectations, which I think when we talk about guilt, my framework for guilt, which I'm sure is, been thought of by many people, but the idea that it's based on our expectations in whatever role it might be. We're talking about parenting minus sort of what is our perceived reality, meaning what do we see ourselves as doing or having accomplished? And I think we can really minimize that part quite a bit, especially in parenting. But I'd love to start by talking about expectations. And you mentioned it in a couple different ways. One, how do we expect ourselves to act as a parent, but also the expectations placed on our children to sort of fulfill something for us. So maybe we start with the former and then work our way to the latter if we
Yeah,
can.
so good. So, one of the first questions I often ask parents who are wrestling with feeling confident, which is one of the most common reason people come to me, is what it means to be a good parent. Mothers are primarily who I coach, but I have a ton of dads, thankfully. And I'm always astonished by how very many people don't either have an answer to that or the answer that they have is based on someone else's decision about what that means. And I'll just give you an example. Like a lot of moms or dads think that being a good parent means staying home. Okay, that's not on my list of things. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying when I think good moms stay home, I feel terrible because I work full time and I always have. And so I just don't choose to put that on my list of things that make a good parent because I just don't want to feel bad about it all the time. I want to decide that being a good parent for me is anchored in working and showing my kids what it looks like to work or being financially independent or whatever that looks like. And so many of our decisions on what it means to be a good parent are best made when they come from a value that we have, right? A value that's important. And values are different for all of us, of course. So, most of the people I coach just don't really even know what it means for them to be a good parent. And I often encourage parents to think about what it means for them, not what their mother-in-law is telling them, or their sister does, or their neighbor does. But just to decide on purpose, is being a good parent being calm? Is it being funny? Is it being playful? Is it being patient? Is it working? Is it not working? And making a decision based on your own compass, your own idea of what works for you, and then deciding on purpose that that's enough.
I love that. It makes me think of, there's an interpersonal therapy, which is a therapy that I've learned to do even way back in my residency, talked about something called reflective appraisal, which is this idea of we think about ourselves the way that it's reflected back to us, especially in our childhood. That if we were seen as all these labels that we get, the smart one or the lazy one or the funny one or the athlete, that can really feed into the way that we see ourselves. But I think also the role models that we had in each of these roles, my mother did stay home. And I think there is conflict or guilt on my part in saying, what does it mean that I chose not to do that? And I had, the privilege of making that choice, I should say, but that I did choose to work. So how do I kind of balance that with what I've pictured as this ideal parent? And I'm wondering if that's a subject that comes up for you.
For sure. My mom also stayed home
Mm.
and did an amazing job and was imperfect, just like we all are. Like, I just don't decide. I think we just forget sometimes that we can just decide what it means to be good enough in our parenting
Mhm.
and then use that as our measuring stick, as our metric to to make choices about what we want to change and what we don't want to change. But certainly, our stories feed into that. As a matter of fact, a lot of people parent either because of the way they were parented, like we just do what our parents did, or many of us decide a good parent is everything our parents weren't, right? And I'm not sure how much that always feeds into a sense of guilt, but when we lean into patterns that we didn't like in our parents, like my mom used to yell at times, and I don't want to yell, but I yell I mean, I used to yell a lot. I'm a recovering yeller. And then I would feel this enormous amount of guilt that I was repeating a pattern, forgetting with forgiveness that that was just one of the ways I learned to communicate anger. And it doesn't have to be a problem. It's something I'm becoming. It's something I'm working to unbecome. A good parent isn't someone that does things perfectly. It's someone who wants to grow into a version of themselves that they like, whatever that rule is for you or for me. It doesn't have to be the same. And we don't all have to have the same plan, which is kind of my point earlier. Like, I think a lot of us look to our friends and we're like, she's a good mom with skills that, like, we don't have. Like, I do not want to volunteer at school. I don't want to play a ton of games. Like, mind numbing for me. And if I just decide that that's just the only metric of being a good parent is being playful and volunteering, I'm always going to feel guilty and bad. I just decide that good parents write a check to school. And good parents do physical activity. They don't have to play a board game. And that really helps to, I'm not gaslighting myself, but it just helps me to absolve these metrics that just aren't even true for me.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons I found it so important to write about guilt is that I wanted women to see how common it was in all of us, not just something that we're not sort of fixing in ourselves. Oh, why do I feel so guilty all the time? And I think the reason we have the expectations we do, like I said, childhood role models, but also let's talk about society and culture. Like how are, mothers in particular treated in culture and the expectations placed on them? We're not just coming up with this in a vacuum, we are very much responding, I think, to expectations out there, right?
That's such a good point. 100%. I mean, the expectations people put on us. I mean, that's kind of what I was talking about when it came to a compass. It's like if you always know what a good parent is for you, then you can meet those expectations with a different energy as opposed to just believing someone else's truth is what the way you get an A in parenting or what the right thing is to do. But yes, certainly. I mean, the obligations specifically for mothers, although for dads, it's not, the patriarchy doesn't help them much either. But the obligations that we put on ourselves and society puts on women in general is a huge contributor to the level of guilt we often feel. And even though it's optional, it doesn't always feel that way. Yeah.
Hmm. Absolutely. And this idea of sort of constant caretaking being expected. And like you said, that can look so different for all different women, that it's not, this is what a good mother does, board games and volunteers at school. But the idea of if your expectation is constant caretaking, how do you push back on that and just do the things that you really do find engaging with your child and be good enough, as you said? right?
Yeah, or just prioritize the gifts in that as opposed to just the gifts in chronic caretaking. Like, is there a cost to chronically meeting your child's needs all the time? There
Mhm.
is a cost to that. We raise children who think that someone is always going to do that for them
Yeah.
sometimes. And so, not all the time, but sometimes. And, speaking of just sort of one of the things that we want to think through as we're adopting guilt that we don't need or doesn't belong to us, I guess is a better way to say it, is uh, a lot of us feel a lot of guilt because we can't change the way our children feel about things,
Mm.
about our boundaries, about their circumstances. There's just so many places where we feel this enormous obligation to meet our child's emotional needs by rescuing them from how they feel or how difficult certain circumstances are for them. There's no way out of that. Like we could wallow in that pool of grief forever. I mean, of guilt forever. But the truth is that that's not ours to have either. That responsibility isn't even ours. Do you want to talk more about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just thinking about, it's something that I'm always trying to help others do. And I absolutely wrote about in the book this sort of hyper accountability we feel for other people's emotional experiences. And yet, in my mother role, I can think of, 5 times in the past month where a child was feeling sad or disappointed or said they were lonely or said they were, feeling left out. And I just really wanted to fix it right away. I didn't always handle it perfectly because I'm human. And so thinking about how would I want to going forward, try and let them have those feelings, know that it's not because I didn't do X enough to protect them or prevent them from feeling that way, first and
Yeah,
foremost.
for sure. I mean, the main reason we do that is because we don't value the importance of really negative emotions. Like we decide to qualify that feeling good or feeling bad is positive and negative when we
Yeah.
forget that being human involves all of those things. And so when our children build the skill of learning to experience what most people would consider to be a negative emotion, the only way for them to do that is to have one. We can't rescue them from that if we want them to have the kind of emotional agility that helps them be emotional adults. And so when we get all caught up in our own guilt because we can't fix something, we're forgetting the value that them experiencing pain can provide for them. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I'm wondering about you in your pediatrician role, as you were sitting in your office and seeing parents bringing children in, if you can think of kind of examples of ways where that very much wasn't happening and it was creating issues, like you said, like so much of a child's illness is affected by how others around it, around that child are reacting. But also on the flip side, parents who really seem to do that well when they had, kids coming in with illness.
Specifically related to illness.
Or coming in to see you for, concerns or issues or questions.
Well, I think a lot of parents make a decision about what a child is feeling based on their own emotions.
Mm,
Okay, so this would be sad for me. This would be hard for me. This would be
yeah.
painful for me. And
Mhm.
they forget to access a level of curiosity about a child's experience that might be super different. And let me just give an example in my own life that isn't related to illness. But, when my husband passed away and when he died, I felt a level of grief and I was not having the same grief as my children were having, right? We're not in the same kind of grief. They're losing a dad, I was losing a spouse. It was a completely different dynamic. And so I think a lot of parents in my office would assume because they were in pain about their child's illness, sadness, whatever the story was, that necessarily meant their child was having a similar experience. They would be, for example, just trying to rescue them from a feeling that was theirs. So I often ask parents, like, is this a you problem or your child's problem? Like, let's just check in first. Both need to be attended to, but the solution is different, right? We don't have to rescue our child from a feeling they're not having. And then also, if our child is having a really big feeling about their illness or about a situation or about a boundary or about something they don't like, are we joining them and scaring them more by validating this emotion so deeply because we're also afraid or worried or sad? That enmeshment, I think, can be really tricky for a family. Um, and, you and I both know this, but children's feelings don't come from us. even though they'll say, you made me mad, right? They come from how they see the world. Okay, so for example, if I'm making a boundary with my children and I'm thinking I'm being a great parent and I'm feeling really good about it, my child's likely to be thinking I'm a terrible parent and they're feeling angry about it. Those feelings are coming from the belief they have that they shouldn't have any rules. And
Yeah.
I just simply don't agree with that. Like we're not on the same place. I don't have to rescue them from the emotion because that's valid. If they think they should be in charge, it makes perfect sense that they be mad. They're just not in charge at
Mhm.
all.
I tell
And
my boys that a lot.
that's right. So those are the kinds of conversations I think if you're asking about in the office, I would have. And then finally, to your point about illness, like I just had a lot of parents come into the office regularly and tell me that their children had anxiety or would qualify their emotional states in a way that their children, you were talking about labels earlier, like that their children um, would almost like adopt, like that would become the narrative of what they believed was true about them.
Mm,
And so I think it's really important for parents for us to figure out what's our worry, what's our emotions, what are we in charge of, and take responsibility for that. Then we don't have to feel guilt about things we can't fix.
mhm.
Our kids' feelings aren't meant to be fixed, they're meant to be understood,
Right. And even discussed, communicated, like talked about. Right.
of course.
Yeah. It makes me think about even just sort of those mismatches with you and a parent. Like my mother is one of the most extroverted people I know. She can talk, my dad jokes she can talk to a wrong number for an hour. And like she's just one of those people who just loves to meet someone new, have conversations, be social. And I'm not necessarily, I consider myself more of an introvert. Again, we're all kind of a mix, but that if my expectation or her expectation that if I were spending the night home reading a book or doing something quietly that I was lonely or missing out or sort of socially struggling, that would have caused, I think, a lot more difficulty for me. I mean, to her credit, she let me be me, which is, what can any good parent try to do that? But I do think that comes up. And the other thing that made me kind of think about as you're thinking about talking with parents and kids, I treat adults in my practice, but this
Mm.
both the fear of or maybe the expectation that my child will have the same thing that I have or that I've somehow passed it
Mhm.
down to them or I've created this risk for them. And I think that can be a big area of guilt as well. Like, even this I hear people say, well, should I have even had kids? Because now they're struggling with what I had to suffer with for so long.
This is so true. This is super, super common where parents hold a ton of guilt when their child, for example, has a diagnosis that is similar to the parents. They feel profound guilt around that. And I'm not sure anymore that I want parents to rescue their kids' feelings, that I'm in the business of rescuing people from feeling guilt. But I will say that what tends to be a bigger thing I see is that parents pre-catastrophize the guilt that they're going to feel, right?
Mm.
They're so worried that their children are going to get that any measure, let's say, of an anxious emotion is sort of some sort of spark that's going to turn into who they are, and they feel either guilt or more commonly worry in that space and are wanting to rescue it, like teach their kids this is something to be avoided. This is terrible for me. And a lot of parents who have this awareness, either, and this may be true for you, you can tell me if this doesn't happen in your own practice either, but the kind of parents that already know they have mental illness, mental struggles, like if they're already seeking support from someone like you, right, they're not the same parent that they had, right? They have a completely different lens that's both positive and negative, but typically the former, that is so likely to be so careful with their children and aware and attentive and getting the services and support that they need. Uh, and so, I think that there's some room to celebrate what your own struggles, whatever your illness is, mental or physical, have taught you that are always going to contribute to your child's capacity and ultimately their resilience.
Yeah, that's such a key point. I mean, I think I would hear that and have that conversation with a number of parents who say, what if my child has what I have? And me saying just that to them, you are in such a different place than whoever your parents were, because often they didn't understand or it wasn't voiced or anxiety wasn't even discussed, for example. You're in such a different place to help them, to talk to them, to empathize with them, that it really is sort of a superpower. Even though you've gone through this suffering to get here, you really are in such a different place in preparing for that and balancing out not oh, catastrophizing, obviously, like you said, but I do think I do see that as sort of a superpower that they've earned through their difficulty.
And I couldn't agree more. And I also believe at my core, and this isn't a belief everyone has to adopt, but I really believe our children choose us. And so, this idea that they would be here to help us heal, to me is just this gorgeous way. We don't always have to fix our children. They're not meant to be fixed. They're perfect and whole unconditionally. The way you feel about your child when they're born, when they've done nothing to deserve your love, is available to you forever. They are perfect. There's nothing you need to fix or handle. But they are this beautiful invitation for our own growth because we sometimes can see parts of ourselves that are still kind of a hot mess or still need to, that we still need to work on. And when we see our kids through that lens, we can almost celebrate the discomfort that that relationship brings instead of being worried it's going to turn into something terrible or worrisome.
Yeah, I think that's a really important way to think about it. And I'm wondering when you're working with parents now, where you have more time, you can dig in a little further. You're teaching them that they are not responsible for their children's emotions or fixing their children's emotions. Like, what are some of the key areas where you really find again and again you're trying to encourage a parent or giving them some ideas about how to make change in their lives so that they become more confident parents?
Well, the most important thing I do is what we've discussed, which is to think of, I don't know, I was talking about a dad with this right before we got on our call today, right? Like we often think that we're trying to like play a game of darts and we're trying to figure out like how to get the best score playing darts, but we don't even know like what the scoreboard is or where we're going. Like we don't always have a compass on kind of what we're looking to excel at, right? We just are looking to our kids as the outcome to make that decision, right? Like, I'll know I'm a good parent when, if you answer that question with anything in your kid in the answer, you're focused on the wrong thing,
Mm,
right? I'll know I'm a good parent when my kid gets into a good college, or when my kid is polite, or when they're kind, or when they're successful, or when they're happy, God forbid. I mean, these are all things out of our control largely.
yeah,
And when we're really more focused for ourselves, I'm going to be a good parent when I work, or when I'm patient, or when I'm calm, or when I'm curious, or considerate, or I'm teaching about fiscal responsibility, or whatever is important to us, then
yeah,
that is always the metric we can lean into to decide if we're doing a good job. And so I work a lot on that. Most parents have a very core belief, understandably, that they're in charge of how their kids turn out. And this comes from this kind of normal codependency we have when we're a parent early on. Like we think of codependency as something that's not optimal and not a good dynamic. But the truth is that codependency is necessary in the early parts. Our kids are literally depending on us to make them happy and to feed them and to do things that keep them alive.
yeah.
And when we're supposed to not care about that is nuanced for most parents. But that is the goal, is that we're not enmeshed in their emotions. We're not codependent. They don't have to be happy in order for us to be happy. Although most parents that listen to this will be like, come on, that isn't true. We're always as unhappy as our unhappiest kid.
Yeah.
But it is optional. It isn't true that we can't make a decision to be okay if our
Mm,
kids aren't okay. And the quicker we pick up on just really focusing on us, not in a selfish way, but in an accountable way, our confidence skyrockets because we're always using that as the metric for success. Our
mm.
children are not what we say like our result in terms of how we can feel good. And I think that's the most powerful lesson that a lot of parents that work with me end up appreciating.
And I think also this, if they recognize or if you're helping them recognize that they might be, living out their dreams through their child, or the experiences they didn't feel like they could allow themselves, I'm wondering how you talk through that with them, or is that something where, you have some guidance in how they can pull back from, I mean, having the insight that it's happening is, I think, huge, but are there any recommendations you would make in those settings?
Well, not every parent wants to, right? But
Mm,
usually we don't have the outcome that we're looking for. Like we're trying, listen, when we're in a place when we really want a kid to turn out a certain way, the way we're parenting is from a place of control.
mm,
Why? Because we always control what we don't trust. And so what our kids receive from us is that we don't trust them, that they're going to be okay. Why? Because we don't. Many of us don't. And so cleaning that up is so vital because what most parents will see at some point is they'll either have a child that learns to people please them. Many children grow up pleasing their parents when they are being controlled. Or what most people come to me for is they have a child that necessarily resists that control because nobody likes to be controlled. And when parents recognize where that control is coming from, this kind of worry and uncertainty and fear, and the impact that's giving to their children in terms of their own sense of self-confidence and capacity,
Mm.
and what we're willing to allow them to have in terms of pain and discomfort in order to build their resilience, then we learn to prioritize one over the other. But control is probably and control from fear is probably the most unproductive and painful place to parent from. And it is where most parents in this generation are parenting from on the regular. And, there's a lot of things to be scared of.
Mhm.
So it checks. I mean, it tracks, as the kids would say, it makes sense.
Right. And you've spoken in other venues about your experience. You mentioned that your spouse had passed away and that he and told me had struggled with addiction throughout your marriage. And I'm sure that you see parents often that are coming in with some sort of stressor or some sort of major change or transition, and wondering how that experience for you might help you now in guiding them or helping them move forward.
Everything about my husband's addiction journey shaped the lens that I have in parenting. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that. I mean, there's just so many places where learning what I couldn't control, trying to parent from fear and trying to handle addiction from fear,
Mm.
taking responsibility and being codependent for his emotions, all of that deeply impacts my work with parents. Um, you know, Speaking to your work, I felt a great deal of guilt that I couldn't fix his addiction. I felt a lot of guilt that I ultimately gave up on our marriage because I felt like somebody had to save our children, and this wasn't the relationship that they deserved. And and you know, there was a per- and that there was a profound sense of um, feeling a responsibility that I had made to myself that I was no longer going to honor.
Mm.
Uh, so I think about this one concept that loving an addict taught me that I use in my parenting all the time, which is kind of detaching with love. Sometimes in parent coaching and in my work, I'll call it benign neglect, right? Where I purposely just allow my children to experience discomfort and pain as a way to allow them to learn exactly what they need to learn. And loving an addict helped me do that because rescuing someone who I was ultimately enabling was horrible for him and horrible for me. It wasn't really anything that was ever going to work. And even though even though letting go didn't end up working either, that he lost his life ultimately, it wasn't mine to fix in the first place.
Mm.
And really, I don't want to minimize how hard that is to realize that you can't save somebody else, but it really isn't our job. And it really diminishes their own capacity when they believe it is someone else's job, which is what I don't want for my kids and what I don't want parents to teach their children.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you felt you were not following through with what you had told yourself you were going to be doing. Was that, staying committed in the relationship? What was it that you felt like you had let it moved from what you expected was going to be the
I
case?
can just remember laying on the floor in my closet crying once, thinking, is this for worse in the better for worse?
Mm.
Like, what is the worse? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't even know what I promised, but like, it seemed kind of like this is worse than worse. Like,
Yeah.
in my head, what was worse? Was it like cancer or was it like, I don't know, infidelity? Like, to me, this was the worst that I didn't know how to qualify. And so I felt this deep, probably as much shame as I did guilt around this kind of like, I don't think this worse is something that is okay for me anymore.
Hmm.
And, I'm a super loyal. I loved being married. I mean, I really did. And my husband, before he got ill, was a wonderful human being. But I just got confused. And then I just let guilt keep me there for a while. It took
Hmm.
me away from what I valued, which was a lot of things that our relationship wasn't meeting.
Mm.
It had nothing to do with me, honestly, you know? And so I think guilt can make your brain a little confused in that way. But that's what I meant by that.
Yeah.
It was my commitment to my marriage and what I really had not really thought through, you know?
Mm. But how could you? How could you know what it was going to be?
Agreed. How does anyone know, right? But that was really the main guilt I felt that I had to work through and just change my mindset around, this
Mm.
isn't we're both not holding up the end of the bargain. It wasn't just about, just about me.
Yeah. And how were you able to eventually make that change or step away in that way?
Well, you know, w- some of the work I do with parents and the work comes from a lot of boundary work I've done with myself, right?
Mm.
So one of the things we talk about in parenting and really in any work, I'm sure you do this as well, is what boundaries are, right? And boundaries are not about setting rules for other people that they have to meet. Boundaries are what we're going to do when other people show up like they're going to show up. And so sometimes we use boundaries accidentally as threats. I'm going to leave if you don't stop drinking, or I'm going to punish you as a child if you don't listen to me. But those aren't boundaries. Those are just nagging rules that we're just constantly reminding because we don't want to have to hold the boundary. So I just finally got to a place when I had a couple of personal boundaries that I just wasn't willing to allow to be crossed. And then, I wish that he wouldn't have crossed that line, but he did. And when he did, I already had a plan on what I was going to do. And, speaking to the way that that experience has informed my work with parents, like I remember how excruciating having to hold that boundary felt. And it is true when we hold a boundary with our child. One of my siblings had to do that this week. It feels terrible when we have to hold something that we said we were going to do. You can't go out if you have X, Y, and Z, or I won't let you have the car if you're late, or you can't have dessert if you didn't eat dinner. That protest, that unhappiness that people are receiving, with the boundary is challenging to accept. But it's a necessary way to preserve our own sanity. And it really is our only option if we want to be whole and healed and confident and in control of our lives. The insanity comes from just waiting for someone else to change and then being pissed off that they don't.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that is tricky with kids and boundaries and not using it as like sort of an ultimatum or some kind of threat, and also living with the fact that they're going to be angry at you or disappointed in you and are not always shy about saying that. I think for really standing your ground. I think there can be a challenge when maybe the parents in a relationship have a different approach to boundary setting or a different approach to kind of consistency or following through. I'm wondering if that comes up for you in your coaching, because I imagine you're working with one parent. I don't know if you ever do two at once, but do you have run into those kinds of circumstances?
I find so I do both. If there's a lot of conflict, I won't coach together, even if we have, I'll coach them separately. I will coach both of them, but I won't coach them at the same time because it turns into kind of marital counseling, which is not what we're doing. What I do find about most families, and this may be true for some of your listeners, is that most of us have the same goals. We want to raise kids that are good people, who listen, who are kind, right? Who treat others with respect. Like it's not like the skill sets that we're all trying to get in our kids, that they're happy, that they're successful, are almost always the same, right? But there are different obstacles to certain parents on how to get there. And we punch ourselves in the face with a ton of obstacles that are our own problems, or ways that we were parented, or skills that we have. Like I'm not a very patient or flexible person, and I might have to lean, for example, on my partner when I had one that was really helpful in that way. So I don't find that it's a problem if parents have different um, boundaries as long as they have their values are the same. If their values are similar, it tends to work okay.
Mhm.
And to me, the importance more is that we're consistent about it, and one parent can be super consistent and the other one doesn't have to be, but children can tell the difference, especially in contentious relationships when there's divorce and there are different rules at mom's house and dad's house. Kids are quite adaptable. They can handle all of those things. But in general, being honest about what your boundaries are with your children creates a great deal of trust. It helps them know what to expect from you. It helps them to believe you say what you're going to say, right? It's a very honest way to have a relationship with someone. And when I frame it in that way, many parents can agree that boundaries are an optimal choice compared to what they're currently doing. Plus, what they're currently doing typically isn't working, to be honest. So
Yeah.
that's an advantage on my part too. Yeah.
But I think that's a really helpful phrase. I have certainly one that my husband and I use together or with each other is, look, we have the same goals here. And so we may disagree on some point. We may have this conflict on our approach, but we really do have the same goals and this deep love that's underlying that. So how do we find some common ground? And usually with some time and more conversation, we can get there, but it is
Yeah.
really difficult.
Or you can lean on one of you versus the other if that
Yeah.
skill is better for you. Like there's certain things that I'm just really not good at being consistent about, like making the
Yeah.
bed. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to have that argument every day. I really don't care. And so, that is not a skill of mine. Maybe my partner feels really strongly about something like that. And then we're just going to lean into him being in charge or her being in charge of that boundary, right? Instead of putting me in a position where I constantly have to feel guilty that I'm not doing it right or I'm not being consistent. Like that's just not a skill I'm good at. So let's just
Mhm.
not put me in charge.
Yeah.
And that's a way we can absolve ourselves of guilt as well in our parenting, where we just stop making ourselves responsible for things we either don't care about or we're not good at.
Hmm. Oh, I love that. It's like that's good permission. I'm trying to think of these different options. I mean, I certainly say no to video games with my boys, and I think that is that is okay. That gives me motion sickness. Like I'm not going to play Super Mario Brothers or what have you.
Yeah, I think parents who come to me with they'll want to know what all the rules are that they should have. And, I try not to be too prescriptive in my work with parents, even though many people wish that I would. I know the right way to do a lot of things, but it's my right, right? And
Yeah.
so what I don't want to have a parent who doesn't have the same value or doesn't place as much importance as something on as I do to then walk around feeling guilty because they're not doing it the way I said it or the right way. It's not a thing. I'm neurotic about table manners, for example. I'm nuts, totally nuts. And it's really important to me that my kids eat nicely. You could think that's stupid. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
You're wrong. You're wrong. No, I'm kidding. Um, but if I told a parent that's the way to eat, and then they really were someone who just did not prioritize that, it was not important to them, they walk around thinking I'm just the worst parent because I just don't do that, as opposed to just looking inward and thinking like, actually, my kids are going to eat fine eventually. I just don't want to have a dinner where I talk about manners all the time. That's not where my value is. I want to talk about whatever. Uh, that comes up a lot.
Yeah. No, I think you're at my dinner table, actually. Although I'm not the one who's as worried about it, but I do think it's
Yes.
important.
Yeah. Well, it is to some, it isn't to others. And it is important to me, so it is important then.
Right.
But that's where we get in our own way of really trying to use someone else's playbook for what's really just a value for us.
Yeah. So I just want to reiterate some of these great points you made. One being kind of knowing your own values, knowing what's important to you, and really I think being confident in that, that a good parent can look many, many different ways, and you get to try and find that for yourself or in your relationship with your spouse or loved one if you have a partner, and certainly with your children, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I think setting boundaries, recognizing that your kids are going to feel a certain way about those and express that, and that your responsibility really is to set the boundaries that align with your values and what you think is important to be teaching and sharing with them.
Yeah, and to allow them to feel about it how they're going to feel and
Hmm.
not taking on any of their emotional upsetness as a measure of whether you're parenting well or not well. The
Hmm.
measure is whether you honor your boundary, right? Not whether or not your kids have a reaction to it.
And I think the hardest one, I think, to really believe, and I do believe, but I think for us to live every day is a sense of I can be a really great parent and I can't control how my kids turn out or what they choose to do or how successful they might be, that it really is out of my control. I can only do the best I can to nurture the person in front of me.
Yeah, that's the most painful and also kind of like the one that parents resist the most, right? Surely there's something I can do.
Yeah.
And even if it was true that you could control another person, I just often ask the question, why would you want to? Why would we be turning a child into someone who didn't have their own compass, that didn't sort of evolve into who they were meant to be? How can we release our expectations of who someone should be or who we need them to be so we can feel not guilty or as a good parent and just allow them to blossom as the person that they were meant to be? There's just a really powerful role we can play in shepherding our children in that way. still being what they call like a lighthouse for our values and kind of pointing them in the direction, but just recognizing that their sales may go a different way or that they may want to take a GPS in a different direction. And just celebrating that is
Mhm.
the best and loudest way to love our kids.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to end with that. I think that is beautiful, beautiful sort of end point. And Dr. Seidel, I really appreciate you coming on, sharing these ideas around parenting, and I hope that we can have you come back in the future and keep talking.
It would be a privilege. Yeah. So grateful to be here. I love the work you're doing in the world. So thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And anyone listening, just to keep in mind, this should not be used as medical advice. We both are physicians here and trying to share information, but if you do have questions or concerns, please reach out to your healthcare provider and get the care that you need.